بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back. In this video we're going to be looking at the question of hurmati musahara. This is when a person comes into contact with a person of the opposite gender in a certain circumstance, usually to do with desire. If someone touches a person of the opposite gender with desire, then what are the implications of that? So that's the question we're going to be exploring, inshaAllah ta'ala. I'll read the Arabic for you first, I'll translate it, and then inshaAllah ta'ala that will let us explore the particular question. So this begins from here. So وَمَن مَسَّتْهُ إِمْرَأَةٌ بِشَهْوَةٍ, whoever touches or is touched by a woman with desire, then her mother and her child, her daughter, becomes haram for him. That's up until here. And then Imam Shafi'i comes in and he says, وَقَالَ الشَّافِعِيُّ لَا تُحْرَمْ. He disagrees and says they don't become haram. In other words, the mother of that woman and neither does the daughter or daughters of that woman become haram. وعلى هذا الخلاف مسه امرأة بشهوة ونظرة إلى فرجها ونظرها إلى ذكره عن شهوة له أن المس والنظر ليس في معنى الدخول ولهذا لا يتعلق بهذا فساد الصوم والإحرام ووجوب الاغتصاب فلا يلحقان به. So Imam Shafi says it doesn't happen, and according to this debate there's also the idea of touching a woman with desire or looking at her private parts with desire or looking at his private parts with desire. He says that even touching and looking are not in the meaning of dukhul, and this is something that we're going to look at according to Imam Shafi. And so for this reason, this is not connected, both of them are not connected to fasting, neither to the ihram and neither to the wujub of اغتسال. ولهذا لا يتعلق بهما فساد الصوم والإحرام ووجوب الاغتسال. So that's what Imam Shafi'i says. فلا يلحقان به. ولنا أن المس والنذر سبب داع إلى الوطء فيقام مقامه في موضع احتياط. And according to us, that touching and looking are a cause that calls towards wati, intercourse, and so we put it in its place in lieu of ihtiyat, to be on a position of ihtiyat, muhtad, to be safe. ثم, then we say ثم إن المس بشهوة أن ينتشر الآلات, that this idea of mas bishahwa, touching with desire, is that the private organ either extends أو تزداد انتشارا or increases in extension. هو الصحيح, and that's the sahih position. والمعتبر النظر إلى فرج الداخل, and what's considered here is looking into the woman's private part. ولا يتحقق ذلك إلا عند إتكائها, and this doesn't happen except when she is lying down or leaning on something. ولو مس فأنزل فقد قيل يوجب الحرمة. If he touches her and he ejaculates, then it's said that hurmat is established. والصحيح أنه لا يجوبها, though the sahih opinion appears to be that no, hurma is not established. لأنه بالإنزال تبين أنه غير مفضٍ إلى الوطء, because by ejaculating this makes it clear that he did not this does not lead to intercourse. وعلى هذا إتيان المرأة في الدبر, and based on this difference of opinion, coming to a woman from the backside, if you like, from her back, then this is the same mas'ala here. So we're going to come across all of these discussions insha'Allah ta'ala in this video. The first thing I think it's very important to make clear here is that this is from the khawas of Jami' al-Saghir. So this is a very important text that every advanced student of knowledge should study at least once in their life and become familiar with the Jami' al-Saghir. And this is one of those really important questions that appears in the Jami' al-Saghir, which we won't go into today, but maybe in the future, insha'Allah ta'ala, we will go into it. So let's kind of look at the question in detail. So what is a mas'ala first? So let's kind of have that in front of us. The mas'ala is basically, if, in this case, I've used the example of a man, but if somebody does this one, touches someone with desire, either male touching the female, female touching the male, or someone sees in private parts, the inside of the private parts of the woman, or the woman sees a private part of the man with desire. These things establish what's called hurmatul musahara, and so as a consequence, that person's mother and daughter become haram for you. You're not allowed to marry them. And this has all to do with a key theory in the Hanafi madhab, which is that touching is established as a meaning. The meaning of touching is of entry, right? And the rational way to think of this is what we call cause and effect. In the previous video, if you remember, there was a debate between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is, and the Hanafis said that if somebody does zina with somebody, then that establishes hurmat al-musara, just like it establishes it here. The Shafis, of course, have a different position, and it's the same idea. So it's built on the previous case, because we say that when you touch with desire, it usually leads to intercourse, and that leads to children, and that child becomes a part of both the male and the female, which is exactly what we discussed in the previous case, sababul juz'iyya, that while in the previous case we went from here, intercourse, to here, all we're doing now is we're sort of like adding an extra case, touching with desire. So we said, well, intercourse leads to children, children leads to part of you, and therefore establishes hurmat al-musara. That was a Hanafi position. So even if you were to fornicate with someone, it would lead to the same consequence. Now we're just adding on the case. So, well, what happens when you touch someone of the opposite gender with desire? And that's what the Hanafi is doing. It's all based on this rationale here. Okay, and of course the Hanafis will also have hadiths which are in the books, but this is the extension, if you like, or reflection on the previous case. So they are linked together. Imam Shafi, may Allah be pleased with him, he says no, there's no hurma established here, according to him, because for him no entry has occurred. There's been no entry. No one has engaged in intercourse. But for the Hanafis, this is really important. The sababul walad, right? We really want to make sure that there's nothing that allows or opens a door for a child to come out, which becomes part of the male and the female, and that creates problems. So touching with desire is a cause and effect relationship. And so Imam Shafi'i, for example, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَالنَّذْرَ لَيْسَ فِي مَعْنَى الدُّخُولِ. For him, nazar is not, nazar or touching, seeing or touching is not in the meaning of dukhul. And so for him, he extends it. This is something that we'll see consistently, that if somebody was to touch, if somebody was to touch or see the private part, the fast wouldn't break, the ihram wouldn't break, and neither would ghusl become wajib upon that person. So this is for Imam Shafi. Imam Shafi, in fact, is consistent, because in the previous case he also argued in the similar way. So he's been consistent with his reasoning, and we as Hanafis are being consistent in our reasoning. So this is why hurmat al-musahara, to understand the debate, you have to understand other debates that come across. So for example, the debate of juz'iyya, because there's this idea that wati, intercourse, leads to children, children become a part of the male and the female, therefore hurmat al-musahara is established. Here we're saying we're touching with desire leads to the same thing. I want you to remember this touching with desire as well, and remember this chain. Now I want you to also reflect that if this chain is broken, then the effect no longer exists. And if the effect no longer exists, then this mas'ala obviously changes. And then we obviously say that ihtiyat, this is a position that we take, that we want to take ihtiyat, we want to be muhtar, we want to be cautious as much as possible, because this is such a serious matter according to the Hanafi. So I hope that's very, very clear. And of course, we have our own hadith, and they'll of course have their own hadith as well. So let's just return to the final part of this mas'ala. What is a sign of this? Now, if you think to yourself for a moment, desires are something that's hidden, it's batin, it's hidden in the person, so you can't see it. So we have to have something that tells us, informs us of what is the effect of desire. The effect of desire here is that the private organ, the private part extends, or there's an increase in that extension. So what we have is that because we can't see what's hidden, we have to have something that's going to give us a way back to find out what's hidden. So in fiqh, this is what we do, right? So we can't have any other way. So somebody says, well, how do you have desire? They say, well, it's based on what's apparent. And this is the Sahih position, which basically means that there's some difference of opinion here. Some ulama say no, even if you don't have an erection, for example, that hurmat musahara still, that desire is still there. But the mainstream opinion is no, there has to be some natural or outward movement which proves that desire was there. So that's also a condition according to the ulama, which gives some leeway, I guess. And then the Sheikh says, وَالْمُعْتَبَرْ النَّظَرُ إِلَى فَرْجِ الدَّاخِلِ. When it comes to looking at the woman, it's about looking at the internal inside of her private part, and that only happens when she's lying down or leaning against something. So this goes back to this idea of dukhul. We talked about this before. What is in the meaning of dukhul, right? So that chain is very, very important. Now, what the fuqaha do is they stress test what they've just said. So if you remember in this slide here, we talked about this. Oops. We talked about this chain and effect. Chain, touching with desire leads to intercourse. Intercourse leads to children, and that's part of both male and female. Therefore, hurmat musahara. But what if part of this chain is broken? So that's what the fuqaha are debating in the next question here. So I want to return to that right now. So they say, what if the person touches a woman and he ejaculates, right? Some scholars say, so they say that وَلَا مَسَّ فَأَنزَلَ فَقِيلَ إِنَّهُ يُوجِبُ الْحُرْمَةِ. There is a position, a small position, that says حُرْمَةِ الْمُسَارَةِ still applies, but the Sahih qawl is that no. Now, why is that different? Why is it that we've just said that if you touch a woman or see the private parts, she looks at your private parts with desire, then that's a cause for wati, that's a cause for intercourse. Intercourse leads to children. A child is a part of you and a part of the woman, and therefore hurmati musahara, you can't marry her mother and her father. But why is it that you're not saying that here? Well, if you think about it, when a person ejaculates, they've broken the chain. Yeah, when a person ejaculates or their desires are fulfilled, there's no wati going to happen anymore. Can you see? So this cause and effect is very, very important for the fuqaha. So I want you to think about this very, very carefully and think like a faqih. Have that tafaqquh, that when a chain is broken or is compromised, then the hukm no longer, the ruling will no longer apply. أنه لا يجيبها لأنه بالإنزال تبين أنه غير مفزن إلى الوطن. Exactly what's going on here. He's saying that once he has inzal, once there's ejaculation, then it's clear, tabayyan, it's clear that it's not going to lead to wati because the body cools down and so forth and so on. And he says right at the end, وَعَلَى هَذَا إِتْيَانُ الْمَرْأَةِ فِي الدُّبُرِ. Like if a person comes to the back of a woman, then the same mas'ala applies here. So again, what the fuqaha will do is they will have these debates. Because when there's clearly no intention to have wati, because that's not a place of having children, right? That part of the body. Very nice, very straightforward. But you can see the fuqaha are very careful, very, very cautious. There's a lot to be explained more in detail, inshallah, in future lessons. I'll do that for you. If you found this useful, please leave some comments, leave some feedback. Inshallah, I'll see you in the next question. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.